Welcome everybody to the LSA webinar on the state of beacons and proximity marketing with Unicast co-founder and CEO Thomas Wallet. I'm Greg Sterling, and I will be setting up Thomas and moderating the Q&A portion of the webinar today. A rebroadcast of this webinar will be available on Monday, and you will get an email indicating its availability on Monday. And let's get into the slides. This is a very interesting subject, obviously. Before we get into Thomas's presentation and my slides, I just want to let people know about the PLACE conference if you don't already. It's a conference that LSA is producing. I started it in 2013, but LSA is now producing it on proximity, indoor location, location analytics, and Thomas is going to be one of the featured speakers talking about beacons and examples of beacon use cases and best practices. So check it out at placeconference.net. Next slide. We've got some great speakers, as I just mentioned. There'll be a great diverse group of attendees, agencies, retailers, publishers, and tech providers. So we hope that you will come. Tomorrow is the deadline for early bird registration, so you might want to get a jump on that. Placeconference.net. So let's jump into the content here. Next slide. So as you all know, smartphone penetration now has exceeded 80%. It's higher among affluent consumers, and more than 90% of millennials in the U.S. have smartphones, and the numbers are comparable in Europe and Asia. Next slide. The phone is really the center of all media now for everybody, regardless of whether it's traditional media or digital media. I think Google just put out some data that was showing in terms of Olympic TV commercials, something like 93% or 94% of searches that responded to Olympic TV commercials were done on a mobile device. So as you all know from your own personal experience, these are the primary consumer internet access devices. Next slide, please. So as people move through the world, as most of you already know, they create a digital footprint, and their location history is full of valuable insights and information. Next slide. And that's also true indoors. So we're seeing the marriage of the digital and physical worlds, and indoor location is becoming a more and more viable tool for operational purposes, for enterprise, various enterprise use cases, and consumer marketing. So you can do all kinds of things with indoor location beyond distributing coupons to people, which is always the typical example, but just lots and lots of interesting consumer behavior insights, operational insights that can come from indoor location. Next slide, please. Lots of surveys reflect that consumers use their smartphones indoors to get things like price information, product information, review information, and yes, deal searches and coupon searches. I mean, this is a Session M survey of 12,000 U.S. smartphone owners, but there's many, many other sources of similar data. So this is a phenomenon that is a great opportunity for all kinds of marketers, all kinds of enterprises. Next slide, please. Now to beacons, the subject of today's webinar. Bluetooth low energy technology has been around for years and years, but the beacon era really begins with the announcement of iBeacon at the Apple 2013 Developer Conference. Apple didn't invent the technology, but they put it on the map in terms of their announcement that they were adopting it. And so immediately there was enormous hype, enormous expectations. Everybody was writing about beacons and beacon capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. There, massive hype, yes. Next slide. And so after, a year or so went by and consumers didn't see a lot of deployments, retailers were still largely testing beacons, the expectations were unfulfilled, and we got into this is the Gartner hype cycle, we got into this sort of disillusionment phase, I think, where people started thinking, well, beacons aren't going to live up to their potential, it's not really happening, it's not really that interesting anymore, we're moving on, right? So this is a typical pattern that happens as the graph indicates. Next slide, please. But in fact, what's happened is there's been a lot of deployments. There are rollouts in hospitality, in airports, in hospitals, in lots of sports situations, as you'll hear about in a little bit. Certainly in retail, many of the major retailers are moving beyond pilot stages or already have done large-scale deployments. Events, so there's a lot of different scenarios where beacons are being used, and indoor location more broadly is being used for all kinds of purposes. Next slide, please. So one of the things that's at stake here, just to focus on the marketing piece for a second, is a lot of money that currently is being spent on shopper marketing, on merchandising, on in-store promotions. There are a lot of different estimates in the market, and I've collected a bunch of them here. Anywhere from $20 to $50 billion annually is spent by CPG companies and others to influence consumers in stores, and that's grocery stores, that's department stores, all kinds of environments. So there's an enormous amount of money here, some of which will transfer to proximity marketing in indoor locations. That doesn't count any of the IT spending or infrastructure spending to support this. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide, I think, before we turn it over to Thomas for some of the specifics. So what's the opportunity? I mean, beacons are just one of many different technologies that include geomagnetic positioning and Wi-Fi and NFC. There's a whole slew of indoor location or proximity technologies that we're not really going to talk about today, but we'll cover at the PLACE conference to varying degrees. But in terms of the opportunity here with beacons and indoor location, there's a great opportunity to deliver a better experience. And this is really important for retailers, a better customer experience, a more personalized experience to really help them regain some of the edge that they had, that they're really ceding to e-commerce to some degree. Indoor marketing, as we've discussed already. Shopper analytics. This is another really powerful tool to figure out who your customers are. Not limited to beacons, but one of the beacon opportunities. And then, of course, offline attribution. I did a webinar, if you weren't on it, on the rise of location analytics and its significance for the broader digital marketplace. And offline attribution is one of the major and critical trends that is starting to happen and really kick in a big way. And then, of course, you can do offline to online retargeting, which is not on this list, but that's another piece of this. I should have mentioned also that Google has a big beacon initiative in the form of Eddystone, which is really interesting and different from the iBeacon protocol in the sense that you can push marketing messages and communications to people without the presence of a particular app on the phone. You can do it through the browser. Anyway, so I'm going to turn it over to Thomas now to talk about specific use cases and implementations that are happening today. And then at the end, we'll take questions. You can submit questions at any time, but Thomas and I will discuss your questions at the end. So take it away, Thomas.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for a very, very, very good introduction. And hi, everyone. My name is Thomas Wally, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Unicast. We are a New York-based company. And to give a quick introduction to what Unicast does is that we are the world's largest platform of beacon and proximity companies. So we really do what Greg touched upon, that we connect the physical world to the digital world so that advertisers can use this very valuable beacon and proximity data for either accurate targeting at scale. So this is kind of how we look at the ecosystem. Like we see here on the left-hand side, there's a lot of retailers and brands. They choose their desired proximity solution provider. On the right-hand side, you have all the advertising platforms. And what we really try to do is to make sure that the valuable data from proximity solution providers, or PSPs as we call them, can be used in online advertising and attribution. One of the challenges in this market is that there are 400 different proximity companies out there. So very few of them have the scale that is necessary. We know that online advertising is very largely driven by scale. You have to reach a large volume of users. So our platform, Unicast Prox, connects the whole proximity industry with more than 60 players into a very growing ad ecosystem which focuses more and more on proximity data. But I'm not here to talk about Unicast or what we do as our core business. We also have another initiative on the side which is called Proxbook. So Proxbook is a directory. It is a directory of proximity solution companies that deploys beacons and Wi-Fi and NFC and QR codes. So we can help the industry and we can help retail and brands and media agencies to find a suitable proximity partner. And as I mentioned in the beginning, there are more than 450 different proximity companies out there, so it's a very complex ecosystem. It's very hard for a retailer or a brand to figure out what are the right proximity vendor for my choice. So we decided to build Proxbook. So Proxbook now consists of 342 members. So that is all 342 proximity companies that have created a profile. They have listed their use cases, their technologies, the verticals that they operate in. And for a retailer, it's then very easy to find the right proximity company. You can go onto proxbook.com. You can search for a beacon company with analytics, with payments in the US, focusing on hospitality. Boom, you will get 3 or 4 companies that can provide you such services, and you can reach out and you can really start to develop your proximity strategy together with them. So I would say this is probably the most comprehensive directory of proximity companies out there. Proximity companies from 46 countries. There are 20 different industry verticals among all these companies. And in addition, and to Greg's point, that there's been a lot of hype in this market, and people have been wondering what's happening with beacons, are actually there, what the retailers and brands doing. We saw the need to gather all of the most interesting use cases that could be found out there. So we have a huge directory on Proxbook with 150 different use cases within many industries, so you can really see what have other brands and retailers, airports, and sports stadiums done successfully when deploying beacons. So Proxbook is a free tool, it's free of charge, it's our way of ensuring that we can connect brands and retailers with the right proximity vendor. And as a consequence of Proxbook, we get a lot of insightful data, right? We get to know a lot about what's happening in the industry, and we thought, hey, why don't we share this with everyone that wants to learn about proximity? So every quarter we release the Proxbook report, which is a report that takes into consideration everything that's happening in the ecosystem, the development of technologies and use cases, and that is what I will give you a glimpse of now. I will give you a few slides of the Proxbook report, and hopefully you want to download the full report, again, free of charge, at proxbook.com later. So one of the key questions out there is how many sensors are deployed? And I think from a consumer perspective, we shouldn't expect to see the sensors. We shouldn't expect to feel the sensors. We should just expect to get great consumer experiences triggered by beacons and other proximity technologies. But I think this is a very interesting data point to track because it says something about the maturity of the market. So when we launched the first Proxbook report in Q2 15, our proximity companies recorded that they had deployed a total of just below 900,000 beacons. If we fast forward that 5 quarters, in the Q2 report this year, we now record more than 8 million beacons. So that's a growth of 33%, which is pretty astonishing for a business that's been only around for a couple of years. Another important aspect of the beacon is the standards. And Greg mentioned earlier that Apple launched iBeacon at the World Developer Conference in 2013. They definitely took the lead. Eddystone and Google came a bit behind, and we can see this from this graph, the popularity of different beacon standards. That means that what kind of beacon standards do the current proximity companies support? So iBeacon is by far the most developed, and the standard that is used by most proximity companies has also something to do with the fact that they've been around since the beginning. But Eddystone and Google have really started to eat Apple's market share. When they launched this early on, there was only a handful of companies that really adopted Eddystone, but we now see from the Q2 report this year that close to 50% of all proximity companies out there support Eddystone to ensure they can offer two protocols to their clients. And the question is, what will Apple do? Like, Google has done so much stuff. They are really investing time and resources, developing new technologies and new standards. It's been very quiet from Apple. It's been very quiet from Apple the last 2 years, and as we all know, they have a tendency to be very silent. But we believe that with Apple Pay, which hopefully will accelerate the next year or two when NFC will be deployed in iPhone 7, we might see some very exciting news. And talking about news, last quarter there were two main news in the proximity industry that I want to point out. And this very much ties into Google. So Google has launched Eddystone, a great protocol that enables beacons to speak directly with the Chrome browser. So you actually bypassing the app that has limited some of the growth potential for the industry. But with Eddystone, Google's primary goal is that the physical web will get an improved user interface and that it will increase consumer adoption of proximity sensors. And there were three primary components of Eddystone that was released this quarter. It was first the nearby notification, which is it's a huge add-on that it will fight on all fronts, because what nearby notifications will do is that it will help to increase ad adoption. It will enable scale for beacon communication, whether it's a URL beacon or an iBeacon or Eddystone UID. So this is something that Google has been cooking for a long time, we know, but now they really opened this up to ensure that adoption can happen. And we speak to Google frequently. We know that they're also focusing their resources on the proximity beacon API. And that has a purpose that it will help out with the challenge that the industry faces to make sure the ecosystem succeeds. So they've been very clear about that. They don't want to compete with the PSPs. The proximity beacon API will only be done so they can foster and they can nurture the growing proximity ecosystem. And we can't talk about Google Eddystone without talking about Android instant apps, which is very relevant for URL beacons, because this means that a URL now can be served not only to regular websites, but to an actual fragment of an app. So what this will help is that this will funnel users to download the app using Chrome or using a web browser as the trigger, which is one of the challenges for a lot of retail and brands out there. How do I get people to download my app? So major leap from Google last quarter, and we know the guys well. We know that they have much more cooking. In addition, Bluetooth 5 is another industry news worth highlighting. This will include significant increased range. It will be much higher speed on the broadcast capacity, and the aim here is to really transform the way people experience IoT. So more technology, companies are investing in ways that the technology will be better, it will be easier to use, so that more companies and retail brands can deploy this. Going back to Proxbook report and the numbers that we saw last quarter, this is focusing on the products and services that are most popular out there. And proximity technology is, besides being used for push notifications to send the right message to the right consumer at the right time, it's also to a large extent being used for analytics. And that is kind of where we've seen a steady growth the last 5 quarters, that retailer brands want to understand how many people went into my store, what did they do, where did they spend their time, what messages did they click on. So for retailer brands and vendors, it's a great intel tool. We're also seeing here a growth in proximity advertising networks, where beacons and beacon companies and apps are allowing other partners to take advantage of the infrastructure to send relevant communication. It doesn't only have to be the classic coupon as we have read about so much, but it can be tailored content. tailored content that increases the user experience of that specific venue. Two other developments that we see this quarter is in online retargeting. As beacons are now starting to gather a certain volume of interactions, as advertisers understand the value of this very valuable and accurate proximity data, retail and brands, they want to use proximity data when they run marketing campaigns. Imagine if you are a retailer or a brand and you badly want to retarget your own customers. There isn't a better way to do that than by actually using data from the people that have been in your store. So we, of course, see this as a very exciting development that not only is beacons of proximity focusing on what's happening in the store, but is actually creating a user experience outside of the store with a goal to bring people back. And companies and brands that are deploying beacons, they also have got their eyes up for data monetization. So again, proximity data is collected when people interact with beacons, and there are a lot of brands and advertisers out there that are willing to buy this data. And this is a good way for a lot of brands and proximity companies to very quickly get an ROI on their beacon deployment. They can monetize their proximity data, allow others to get access to this accurate data about where people have been. So it's another addition to how we see the proximity market is developing. And when we speak about industry verticals, retail gets the lion's share of the media's attention. There's been a lot of articles about what the Macy's are doing, what Target are doing, etc. But I think it's worth noting, and I think this is what I find one of the most valuable resources at Proxspect, is to see what different verticals are actually deploying beacons and what verticals do our proximity companies support. And I think it's pretty clear from this comprehensive graph that beacons aren't only for retail. Beacons aren't only for shopping malls. We see a huge uplift in concerts and festivals. You know, these are large venues. People need some help to navigate between the different concert stages. Cinema theater is another vertical that's also picked up beacons. They want just to make the end user experience simpler by sending the ticket to the customer when they enter the store. No paper tickets. So the point here is that even though retail get the most attention in the media, a lot of companies and brands that are not in the retail space should really start to look into beacons, because it is the technology. It will solve a lot of the challenges that they are facing when it comes to creating great user experiences for their customers. And if you break up the number of PSPs, the number of proximity solution providers by area or geography, this is an important slide, because here we see that Europe actually has a leading edge. North America is very close behind, but Asia Pacific, you see that the development isn't happening that quickly. To touch upon Europe first, one of the reasons we believe and we know that Europe is leading is that smartphone penetration is higher in Europe than it is in North America. And of course, beacons and the adoption is very strongly correlated to the smartphone penetration. Asia Pacific is an interesting market. There are a few proximity companies there and a few apps that have managed to take a large share of the market, but we do see that the adoption is a bit slower. Expect very future-oriented countries like Japan and Korea, but in general for the Asia Pacific Ocean, they are lagging behind. All projections though say that within the next 3 to 5 years, they will surpass both North America and Europe. And the Q2 report, approximately this quarter, focused on the sports vertical. And this is a very interesting vertical because based on the numbers and the data that we see in Proxspect, what we actually learned is that sports are one of the most successful and most widely adopted verticals for proximity technology. And I find it pretty fascinating that looking at these numbers, 93% of all MLB stadiums use beacons, 75% of all NFL stadiums use beacons, NBA and NHL are a bit behind, but it's still close to 50% of the stadiums that are using beacons. So question is, why are they doing so? We have been talking to a few of these teams and to the proximity companies, and one of the challenges that these teams have been having the last couple of years is declining ticket sales. And one of the reasons for that is that TV sports is becoming so good. Like, it's so easy and it's so comfortable to just sit in front of the TV, lying on the couch with some popcorn and a beer and watch a great game. With all the results, with all the stats, you can flip through different matches, etc. The conclusion is that TV sports is becoming too good. It's limiting people from actually going to the stadium and see the real game. So what the stadiums have seen the need for is to enhance and increase the user experience at the stadium. They have to make it worth going there. They have to make sure that it's not just about entering the stadium, buying a soda and a hot dog and watch the game, but it's how can that game be relevant? How can the user experience be interesting? How can information be shared to the fans while they're at the game? So sports is a vertical that we believe we will see a large growth in the next coming years. They have a very loyal fan base, and they have a need to get people back to the stadium to recoup for the declining ticket sales. The other industry that we covered in this quarter's Proxbook report is the conference and event space. This is also a category that we see have grown very significantly the last 2 quarters, where you have large conferences like CES, you have music festivals like South by Southwest, the World Mobile Congress, the Cannes Lion Festival this summer, all use beacons. And the use cases here are a bit different. This is very much about navigation. It's very much about how can I, as a user at this conference, take me from booth 15 to booth number 356. Mobile World Congress, it's huge. Like it's seven different buildings. It's very hard to navigate. The event holders want to make sure that users spend their time most efficiently, and they use beacons to navigate people through all these different buildings. So there is a correlation here. If you have a large venue, it's very complex. How can you make sure that you can guide people easily to where they want to be? So I also want to showcase it to use cases that I think are very fascinating. And as I mentioned, we do have 150 use cases on Proxbook. So if you need some inspiration, if you want to see what other companies have done, Proxbook is a great resource for that. But there's 2 cases here that I want to highlight. And the first is actually in the sports vertical. So this was also featured in this quarter's report. And this is a use case from Milwaukee Bucks. They had one target. They were looking to monetize its app content. So the Milwaukee Bucks, they have their own app. They have a very engaged base of fans that use this app frequently, but they saw an opportunity for making incremental revenue. So what the Milwaukee Bucks did was that they invited their sponsors. They invited the sponsors and brand to trigger content in the app. And one of these sponsors were McDonald's. Milwaukee Bucks worked very closely with Signal 360, which is a proximity company that focuses heavily on the sports vertical. And what they did was that they activated geofences across 125 McDonald's restaurants. So this was not about creating an experience at the stadium, but it was about creating an experience for the fans outside of the stadium. So these 125 McDonald's restaurants were activated with a geofence. So when the user entered that specific geofence, they received some content. This was either a recommendation for a menu, it was an offer, or it was just some information about the team and about the game. What's interesting to know here is that the campaign reached over 50% of the users. So 50% of the people that had the app actually got this triggered content. The feedback from the users were great. Singular 360, together with McDonald's and Milwaukee Bucks, spent a lot of time to make sure the content was relevant, and this was something that they knew their fans were interested in. So I think it's pretty remarkable that 50% of the users managed to engage with this content. And for Milwaukee Bucks, this was a great way that they could generate new revenue. And this ties very much back to how we see that a lot of verticals, sports are one, retail is another. We're seeing that sales are declining. They have to be innovative. They have to find new ways to make incremental revenue. And this is where proximity technology is a great way to achieve so. The second use case I want to highlight is a use case from a cinema chain. And the cinema chains now, they see a need to add new channels to sell advertising. And in this case, this is a cinema chain in the Nordics. It's called Kappa. It's the largest cinema chain in the Nordic, couple hundred cinemas. And they had a target here to deploy beacons. So they deployed beacons in around 50 of their cinemas to start with, together with a local proximity company called FluxLoop. And they created some great user experiences. So when the customer entered the cinema, what they did was that they received a coupon. They received a coupon, or they received an offer, or they received content about the movie. So a very classic proximity setup. Content is triggered based on that person's very accurate physical location. And this is where Unicast also played a vital role in this use case, because what we did was that when people enter the store, enter the cinema, they receive a coupon for a Coke campaign. So they were able to redeem a free bottle of Coke. They went on, they watched the movie, and had a great time. But then a week later, when these people were sitting at home, watching the news or browsing on their phone, then suddenly they were retargeted on their mobile with the ad for Coke. Where Coke encouraged these users to go back to the cinema to watch a new movie. They actually received a free ticket if they went back to the movie. So this is a classic and a very well executed campaign where beacons are deployed, a great user experience is created at the venue, data is collected, and then later used for retargeting to bring people back to the cinema. In this case, we saw that over 20% of the people that were retargeted online actually went back to the cinema to watch a second movie and to redeem their ticket. And this created an additional revenue stream both for Kappa, the cinema chain, and also for FluxLoop, which is the PSP. And Coke here, they managed to target a very relevant audience, which is very hard to find without beacon data. So this was a glimpse, guys, of what is in the Proxbook report. I would encourage you to go onto proxbook.com and download the full report. Again, this report focuses on the sports vertical, so there are way more use cases in the report. You can also read more data about how the proximity industry is evolving, and I'm pretty confident that you will pick up a lot of interesting information and learn a trick or two. And again, the report is free of charge, so please visit proxbook.com and enjoy the report.
Okay, great. Thank you, Thomas. That's Thomas's email, obviously, if you would like to contact him directly. I want to remind people, if they're interested in this subject matter and even a broader discussion about proximity marketing, location analytics, location intelligence, online to offline and offline to online, register for the PLACE conference. Really going to be a very interesting event, and we hope to see you there. Send an email to Thomas if you have any follow-up questions or want to know more about Unicast or Proxbook. And thank you very much, everybody who stayed with us. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.